able to talk a little bit more about the Siena bid and why this might be an important bid in terms of your personal work, in that it's a culmination of a lot of what you've been doing, and also in terms of a grander scheme and the importance for Italy, which in this current time is in a bit of economic straits right now.
Big question. Oh, for me, I cannot hide myself. It's a big risk, because it's a classical situation in which you have a very difficult process to control, to maintain, to manage, in which so many decision makers are involved, and so many different responsibilities, and it's very easy that any detail can go wrong and can spoil the whole process and can drive it on the wrong track. European culture capitals, in this sense, have been one of the most important laboratories for cultural production in Europe, and one of the references at the global level. Not incidentally, now, for example, East Asian countries are starting an Asian culture capital program involving China, Japan, and South Korea, if the political tensions of these days are not breaking this up. But so the Siena bid, culture capitals are not a showcase of what you already have, of your cultural jewels, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural capitals are a pitiless diagnosis of what's going wrong, and a clever, possibly, answer in terms how can you creatively use culture to turn the situation upside down and to embark into a viable development path, culturally and economically and socially. So I think that for Italy especially, this is extremely important, because for example, just sticking to the European Culture Capital Program, the past culture capitals in Italy have been Florence in 1986, Bologna in 2000, and Genoa in 2004. All these three capitals have been really uninteresting. They were festivals, big blockbuster events at the best. Oh, that's not particularly interesting. So Italy has never managed so far to produce a capital, and more generally, I must say, a viable local development model in which cultural innovation really made a difference. So I also feel this kind of responsibility and opportunity at the same time, showing that there you can do this, and by doing this, of course, making something that can change the attitude of so many other Italian policymakers towards this. Mm-hmm. But it's not just about Italy. This is a moment in which Europe itself needs new models. Because of course there have been very good capitals in the past, but if you just replicate what they did, they already did it. So it's also a moment to move forward, and it would be a sort of poetic justice. It was Italy in Europe to do this after years, let's say, of opaque national image. Would it work this way?
Fair. So in terms of some of the projects that you have designed for this bid, given the stakes, what's going to be important about
participation? Europe in this is very clear. They want participation. They want people from the bottom to not only to understand, not only to enjoy, but to be part of it. In some sense, it's consistent with this idea that everybody becomes in its own way a cultural producer. So we are willing to gradually involve the city, and we are imagining. At the very beginning, you must act very simple, because if you are too sophisticated, it creates a barrier, especially if this is outspoken. So just to give an idea what will be the first steps that we are just beginning to implement now, we will have some movable tents just wandering around the city and the northern province and the southern province, that will be open platforms in which all the local producers, cultural actors, but also citizens have a space to discuss what are their own views about what the project should be, how they could contribute to that, what they are doing right now, And this is an example, so very simple, but at the same time creating a perception that there is a space in which this can happen. On the other thing, for the culture capital, we need a motto. We have to create a motto, and it will be created by a sort of semantic crowdsourcing. We will create a tag cloud that will be generated by citizens. So citizens themselves will be how the process of generation of meaning interacts with their own proposals, and in the end, through a process of editing and various stages, we will arrive at a motto through a crowdsourcing of the ideas of people. So it will be totally generated from the bottom up. Or we will have a special project which is called 18 in 2019 that will be totally targeted to young people that were born in 2001. They will become, in this case, adults, legal adults in 2019. And they are people who are born in the first year of the new millennium. So, and in this case, the idea is how you are imagining yourself in 2019, what the city would look like in 2019. Hey, by the way, you will be an adult in that time, so you would have possibilities to act. You could be a protagonist in this. So what kind of protagonist would you be? So this is the kind of things we are working on. They are very simple. They are not something sophisticated. That we will have also sophisticated things. We will work on digital platforms and heritage. We will do, I think, highly, geek stuff on, how can you use very evolved, for example, cell phones or tablets or whatever to look at the heritage in a totally different way. But what really I'm caring about now is this, that all the little children, the families, the elderly, they understand that this is something for them. It's not simply something that benefits the city in a very abstract way.
Do you think that they do understand the possible long-term ramifications and effects of something like this, or will it have to be explained in depth?
Well, a lot has to be explained, of course. And at the beginning, you must expect that people will be skeptical because they don't understand what you're meaning. But the best way is show and tell, so to speak. So I'm beginning to show what can be done very simply, very down to earth, not particularly ambitious. And the more we see things happening, the more we can expand the conversation to things that were initially not part of the context. So I have more or less 1 year in front of me to build gradually a high emotional temperature around this thing. And if we are selected for the second step of the bid, because it's a two-step selection process, then I have almost another year to do this. So I'm pretty confident that there is enough time to build. And this is a city that, this is the city of the paleo. This is a city that is able to be inflamed with passion if the right chords are struck. So I think that, well, it's possible. It's a bet, but it's a fair bet.
Do you feel as though there's a lot of pressure in terms of looking at this for a viable model for the future, and especially in particular for Italy, in terms of revitalizing the economy in Italy? You
bet.
Yeah.
There's a real pressure. There is a funny thing that happened recently. There is an online magazine in Italy called Our Tribune that often makes polls that are not statistically representative, but basically this is read by most of the professionals. And they made the poll about who should be the next cultural minister in Italy in the next government. And from the poll it resulted that something like 30% people indicated me as the minister, which tells you something. I mean, I would never dream of being, but not because I'm shying away this, because it's crazy. I mean, being a minister of culture is the perfect way not to do things. But interestingly, this signals very clearly that there is a lot of expectation of this kind of work, that our professionals really think that this kind of projects can lead to something. This is the only sensible way in which I can interpret this funny thing. But this tells me, look, a lot of people is thinking that this can work, and that's not bad. It's good motivation to go on.
And in terms of the position in general, sort of moving away from your personal what's been presented as your bid for cultural minister or minister of culture, I think it's potentially a role that would change under a lot of what you're studying and a lot of what's going on in terms of using creative industry and cultural industry. How do you think some of these positions within institutions, within governments, might be shifted to encompass a little bit more of this new field of thinking?
Well, of course, what we expect is that cultural policy may be taken more seriously. Institutions in this respect, even at the European level, tend to underplay a bit the potential role of culture, not only because culture tends to be cut in terms of budgets when crisis strikes, but also because so many don't really think that culture can provide real answers, for example, to development riddles. They think of science and technology, of course, but science and technology makes perfect sense, but I think that it's not just the whole picture. So what I expect is that if this kind of work is successful, we will see cultural policy climbing up the political agenda to higher priorities that it has now. And that would be a result. At that point, you could even have a cultural minister that makes a difference, but it will not be me.
What's the new horizon for this field? Where are we going to be going next in terms of cultural industry then?
The new horizon is that markets will not be the whole story. That's already happening now. Communities of practice that are creating and circulating contents could even be more important in terms of the whole scale of production and markets themselves. Markets will become one of the possible channels through which you can produce and circulate cultural contents and create economic value. The ways in which economic value will be created in this new world of communities of practice on online, but not necessarily just online communities, we are just beginning to explore it. We know very, very little, and it's understandable because it's such a recent phenomenon that it's even surprising that we are just beginning to scramble it to some degree. So I really expect that the picture of the field of production and experience of culture in the next years is going to change dramatically, and most of what we will be read on manuals, for example, for students, will be very different from what is being read now, and that's exciting. We are at the beginning of a really new era, and I have really no idea of how this particular field will look like in 10 years from now. And that's fantastic.
All right, great. Well, I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to talk and for being here with the Cultural Agents Initiative in class at Harvard. And thank you for spreading these ideas and beginning some of these new seeds here on campus.
You're very welcome, but I must say that Harvard days for me are very exciting all the time. I mean, it's incredible how many stimuli and how many interesting people to discuss with you find around here, but perhaps you know this already.
Of course.